There's a strange kind of truth most people spend their lives running from. The very thing we think disqualifies us from love, respect, or peace might actually be the key to all of it. Let's get honest. Think of one thought, one impulse, or one past version of you that you hope no one ever finds out about. Got it? Good. Because that's where the real work begins. Not in pretending it never happened, but in realizing it still has something to teach you. Alan Watts, in a 1958 conversation about Carl Jung, said this about the Swiss psychologist: he knew himself to be as much a villain as everybody else. That wasn't self-deprecation, that was self-ownership. Jung believed that real wholeness isn't achieved by pretending to be good. It comes from confronting the parts of you that don't behave. But here's what they don't tell you in feel-good self-help. Your shadow isn't just pain, it's power too. That sarcastic voice in your head. It might be your unexpressed creativity. That jealousy you feel. It might be pointing to a truth about your unmet potential. The shadow isn't an enemy, it's unprocessed energy. Alan Watts put it best when he said, "You don't banish the devil by force, you invite him to dance." Now imagine if you could learn how to work with that shadow instead of shoving it down. Not in a mystical way, but through concrete tools grounded in brain science and behavioral psychology. That's what this video offers. We're not just going to explore Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. We'll show you how it applies in modern life, how an MMA fighter used it to stay calm in the ring, how a Fortune 500 negotiator turned his darkest impulses into assets, and how a trauma survivor rewired her nervous system to integrate what most people repress. And it's not just theory. By the end of this, you'll have a practical 3-minute nightly routine that rewires how you interact with your inner villain. We'll look at what happens in the brain when your amygdala hijacks your thoughts, why your worst behaviors are actually learned habits from early life, and how society weaponizes your unhealed wounds for profit. So here's the invitation. Don't watch this video to feel good. Watch it to feel whole. Because the parts of you you're most afraid of might just be the most honest parts you have. Ready to explore what they're trying to say? Let's begin. Behavioral mirror. How we train our inner villain before breakfast. Have you ever noticed how some of your most self-sabotaging habits happen automatically before you even have time to think? Like checking your phone before your feet hit the floor, or zoning out with social media until you're 10 minutes late. These don't seem dramatic, but according to neuroscience, they're powerful rituals, and most of them reinforce something deeper: the quiet approval of your inner saboteur. Let's unpack that. In their book Shadow Syndromes, John J. Rady and Katherine Johnson explain how low-level behavioral patterns, mild anxiety, subtle mood shifts, vague irritability, are often symptoms of deeper psychological themes running in the background. They're the micro-programs of your personal shadow, things you don't think about but that shape your mood, posture, and decisions, especially when you're not paying attention. B.F. Skinner, one of the pioneers of behavioral psychology, showed through his experiments with pigeons that random rewards produce superstition. A pigeon that accidentally flaps its wing before getting food starts believing that the wing flap caused the food. Now pause. Think about that. Isn't that exactly what doom scrolling is? We hit refresh, hoping for a dopamine hit. We're flapping our wings, praying the feed gives us something worth our time. Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on decision-making, described this autopilot as System 1, the fast, reactive part of the mind. It makes snap judgments, often based on outdated data. And guess where much of that data comes from? Unexamined emotional residue, what Jung called the shadow. When you automatically judge someone, talk down to yourself, or lash out at a tiny inconvenience, it's usually not about the moment. It's about a belief buried so deep you've forgotten you ever agreed to it. Something like, "I'm not worthy unless I'm productive," or "If I relax, I'll be left behind." The trick isn't to shame yourself for these moments, it's to track them. That's your first take-home experiment. Pick one of these harmless behaviors. Maybe it's endlessly opening new tabs or running late on purpose. For 72 hours, observe it without trying to fix it. Then ask, what do I get from this? A tiny thrill? A sense of control? That's the shadow's reward system. Because until we become conscious of the games our inner villain plays, we keep feeding it. One scroll, one excuse, one unconscious act at a time. And guess what? The villain isn't evil. It's just efficient, and it's been trained by you. The question is, are you ready to retrain it? Evolution's insurance policy. Why darkness survived natural selection. Let's ask something most people avoid. If human nature is supposed to be kind, why do we still carry so much aggression, envy, and spite? Why do we snap at people we love? Why do we feel secretly satisfied when a rival stumbles? The answer isn't that we're broken, it's that we're ancient. And your shadow? It's your evolutionary backup drive. In his provocative book, The Lucifer Principle, Howard Bloom argues that traits like dominance, deception, and tribal loyalty didn't just randomly appear. They were survival mechanisms. Back in the wild, showing anger could scare off predators. Envy pushed us to compete for scarce resources. And tribal bias? That kept us safe when every outsider might be a threat. The shadow wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. Robert Travers, the evolutionary biologist known for the theory of reciprocal altruism, added a twist. He showed that generosity in humans often includes a secret ledger. We track who owes us, and when that ledger is off, something dark kicks in. Revenge. Even kids show it. That's the shadow's ancient need for balance, an internal justice system that evolved long before courtrooms existed. And in different cultures, we find rituals designed not to repress this darkness, but to release it. Social psychologist Shinobu Kitayama studied collective societies where people express shadow traits through shared ceremonies, masked dances, war games, even anonymous confession walls. These safe spaces serve as pressure valves, outlets that prevent inner demons from leaking out in everyday life. Now here's where modern life gets tricky. Those instincts that once saved us in the jungle, they misfire in the office, or during a passive-aggressive dinner with in-laws. We suppress them, thinking that's maturity. But repressed shadow traits don't disappear. They mutate into stress, insomnia, addiction, and fractured relationships. Here's the insight. Don't moralize your aggression. Relabel it. Call it legacy code. Leftovers from a brain that once had to fight for survival. You're not bad for feeling it. You're human, but you do need an outlet. So whether it's high-intensity interval training, intense journaling where you don't censor anything, or even primal screaming into a pillow, yes, seriously, give that ancient energy a safe exit route. Because if you don't, it'll sneak out sideways, through sarcasm, sabotage, or shame. You can't evolve past your shadow, but you can evolve with it. And when you do, you stop reacting like a caveman in a conference room. You start choosing. That's power. Not control over others, but control over how your ancient programming expresses itself today. The neuroswitchboard, amygdala, alarms, and prefrontal judges. Ever wonder why you can understand something calmly 1 minute and completely lose control the next? Like knowing someone didn't mean to offend you, but still snapping. Or watching yourself spiral into a mood, even as a part of you says, this is irrational. That internal split is not about weakness. It's your brain's design, and the shadow knows exactly how to hijack it. Let's break it down. You have two major control centers involved in how you respond to emotional stress: the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is ancient. It's fast, emotional, and often overreactive. Its job, scan for threats. The prefrontal cortex, on the other hand, is the wise planner. It thinks before acting, regulates emotions, and makes long-term decisions. Ideally, they work together, but under stress, the amygdala takes over. It yanks the wheel. Mark Solms, in his powerful book, The Hidden Spring, A Journey to the Source of Consciousness, explains that much of our emotional life is driven by core, affective circuits that operate below consciousness. They don't ask permission, they fire, they surge, and when they do, the shadow rises, unfiltered, impulsive, and old. It's not that we become someone else, it's that someone who's always been waiting inside takes the front seat. This is what Richard Davidson found in his fMRI scans of monks versus novices. When trained meditators encountered emotional triggers, their brains didn't skip into panic mode. They held the space. Their prefrontal cortex stayed online. That's not some mystical talent, it's a skill, and it means we can rewire how we respond to our shadow moments. A powerful case of this is seen in veterans with PTSD. One study using neurofeedback showed how brain training helped participants literally downshift their amygdala activity during flashbacks. One former soldier described it like turning the volume down on a nightmare. So how do we apply this in everyday life? You start with what's called a vagus nerve reset. It sounds fancy, but it's simple. When you feel a shadow emotion surge, jealousy, rage, shame, pause. Take 5 slow, controlled breaths. Inhale through your nose for 4 seconds. Exhale for 6. That activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which signals safety to your body. The amygdala backs off. The cortex re-engages. This isn't about ignoring your feelings. It's about letting the wise part of your brain hold hands with the wounded part. You're not here to suppress your shadow. You're here to co-lead with it. Every breath is a vote for who's in charge. Because the real battle isn't out there. It's between the alarm that wants to react and the awareness that knows you have another choice. Developmental roots. When childhood defenses become adult offenses. Have you ever reacted to something as an adult and thought, why did that hurt so much? Like a joke that lands like an insult, or silence that feels like abandonment. These aren't random overreactions, they're echoes, ghost signals from a younger version of you who never got closure. In his profound book, The Inner World of Trauma, Donald Kalsched explains that when we experience emotional wounds early in life, especially ones that involve betrayal, neglect, or fear, we often build internal protector figures to shield our most vulnerable parts. These protectors don't age, they don't evolve. They live frozen in time, whispering caution, suspicion, or rage into moments that no longer require it. Think of a child who grew up walking on eggshells. That child might grow into an adult who avoids confrontation like it's life-threatening. Or someone raised in emotional starvation might become hyper-attached or distant, not because they're flawed, but because that pattern once kept them emotionally safe. Mary Ainsworth's research on attachment styles showed this clearly. In her famous strange situation experiments, infants with avoidant attachment looked calm when separated from their caregivers, but biologically, they were in stress overdrive. Fast forward to adulthood, and these are the same people who ghost or shut down in relationships, not because they don't care, but because they learned early that vulnerability was dangerous. And here's where it gets even trickier. As Elizabeth Loftus revealed through her research on memory distortion, we don't just remember events, we edit them. We reshape the past to preserve a story in which we stay heroic. So instead of saying, I was terrified of abandonment, we say, people just let me down. The shadow rewrites history, not out of deception, but survival. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Those protector voices, they become saboteurs. They criticize you when you're about to try something new. They ghost people who get too close. They sabotage good things before they can leave you first. And unless we become aware of these old scripts, we keep confusing trauma responses for instincts. So try this. Pick one painful moment from your past. Now flip the lens. Retell that story from the other person's imagined perspective. Not to excuse them, but to soften the projection. What unmet need were they reacting from? What pain were they carrying? You don't do this to let them off the hook. You do it to set yourself free. Because the shadow is often just a younger you, still trying to protect the castle, long after the war ended. And until you thank that younger part and take the sword back, it will keep fighting battles you've already survived. Dark triad in high definition, meeting narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy inside us. Let's be honest. When we hear terms like narcissist or psychopath, we usually think of someone else. A toxic ex, a power-hungry boss, a manipulative celebrity. But what if I told you that all of us carry traces of those same traits? Not because we're evil, but because evolution wired them into us, for survival, influence, and sometimes, just to get through the day. Barbara Oakley's book, Evil Genes, breaks this down in a way that's hard to ignore. She argues that traits from the so-called dark triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, aren't just found in criminals. They exist on a spectrum, and in small controlled amounts, they can actually help you lead, create, or protect what matters. Robert Hare, the psychologist behind the psychopathy checklist, worked with Paul Babiak to explore how some corporate leaders score high on these traits. They're charming, calculated, and emotionally distant, but they get results. And Kent Keel's fMRI scans show something even more unnerving. In high-scoring individuals, the limbic system, the part that feels, barely lights up during emotional scenes. It's not that they're hiding emotion, it's that their brains aren't wired to register it the same way. Now here's the curveball. Under pressure, during burnout, or in moments of rejection, ordinary people can slip into dark triad behavior. You inflate your ego to mask insecurity, narcissism. You manipulate a situation instead of being direct, Machiavellianism. You emotionally detach to avoid pain, psychopathy. None of this makes you bad, it makes you unbalanced. The danger isn't in having a dark side, the danger is in being blind to it. That's why Jung stressed that the shadow isn't just about recognizing what's repressed, it's about integrating it consciously, because unacknowledged darkness leaks out in destructive ways. But acknowledged darkness, that can be shaped into strength. So here's a practical step. Do a simple self-audit. Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 in 3 areas: empathy, impulse control, and long-term planning. Where do you underperform when no one's watching? That's where your shadow's most active. Then create what I call a shadow budget. Just like financial planning, this is emotional planning. If you know you're short on patience, don't overspend it in the wrong places. If your ego is sensitive to rejection, don't schedule emotionally risky conversations on the same day you're drained. Because here's the truth, power without awareness is dangerous, but power with awareness, that's influence, that's leadership, that's shadow mastery. And it doesn't start by judging others. It starts by looking in the mirror and recognizing the same blueprint that lives in all of us. Social projection: how groups export their demons. You ever notice how fast a group can turn cruel? A few online comments, a whisper behind someone's back, a rumor that spirals out of control. Suddenly, a friend becomes a villain. A stranger becomes a threat, and a group that once felt safe becomes a mob. What's really happening in those moments isn't about the target, it's about projection. And Carl Jung warned us, the more you avoid your own shadow, the more likely you are to throw it onto someone else. This isn't just theory. In his legendary Robber's Cave experiment, social psychologist Muzafer Sharif took 2 groups of boys to a summer camp. At first, they bonded within their own groups, laughing, playing, forming alliances. Then, the experimenters introduced competition. Within days, it turned to hostility, name-calling, flag-burning, raiding each other's cabins. And here's the kicker. The only way to stop it was to create a bigger problem they had to solve together. A forced collaboration. In other words, common enemies unify, but shared fear turns shadows into scapegoats. Jung believed that societies do this just like individuals. When people are too afraid to face their own guilt, rage, or envy, they project it onto others, outsiders, leaders, or entire communities. Irving Goffman, another pioneer of social psychology, called it face work, the act of constantly managing how we're seen. The more polished our public image, the more pressure we feel to hide our private flaws. And the more we hide, the more we unconsciously need someone else to carry what we refuse to admit. That's why cancel culture, witch hunts, and online outrage cycles feel so intoxicating. They give us a temporary sense of being on the right side. We get to feel morally clean by purging someone else's mistakes. But underneath it, we're often just avoiding our own reflection. So here's a challenge. Before you post that angry comment or retweet a takedown, try this. Say this 7-word mantra out loud. Am I fighting my own reflection? You'd be amazed how many arguments dissolve with that one pause. Because group dynamics don't absolve you from shadow work. In fact, they amplify the need for it. The more collective energy you're in, social media, workplaces, movements, the more self-awareness you need to carry. Otherwise, you'll find yourself exiling parts of yourself onto others, punishing in them what you haven't accepted in you. And that's the secret Jung and Watts both touched. We think we fear others' darkness, but what we're really afraid of is recognizing our own. Parapsychology and myth, archetypes breaking into waking life. Have you ever had a dream that felt too real to ignore? Or experienced a coincidence so strange it felt like the universe was speaking in code? These aren't just quirks of the mind, they're messages from the unconscious. And according to both Carl Jung and Alan Watts, they're how your shadow begins to surface when logic won't listen. In the Dark Places of Wisdom, Peter Kingsley describes the ancient Greek understanding of darkness, not as something to escape, but as a place of sacred transformation. The mystics of southern Italy and Anatolia believed wisdom was not born in light, but in silence, stillness, and shadow. Dreams, symbols, and synchronicities weren't random, they were initiations, invitations to confront something you've been avoiding. Jung believed that the unconscious doesn't speak in paragraphs, it speaks in archetypes, symbols, encounters. That's why in the Red Book, his most private journal of inner visions, he writes about meeting a figure named Philemon, an old winged man who became his internal guide. Philemon wasn't just a hallucination, he was the personification of Jung's inner wisdom, his shadow, reframed. And this isn't just mystical poetry. Parapsychological studies, like those conducted by Montague Ullman and Stanley Krippner in the MAP dream telepathy experiments, found that under controlled conditions, people could dream of images sent by someone else, suggesting that the boundary between personal and collective unconscious might be more porous than we think. What does this have to do with you? Well, your dreams are trying to tell you what your ego refuses to hear. That recurring nightmare, that symbol that keeps showing up, that déjà vu that makes no sense. These aren't glitches. They're symbols of shadow content seeking acknowledgement. So here's your invitation. For the next 30 days, keep a shadow symbols log. Every morning, jot down one dream image, one strange coincidence, or even one odd emotional reaction. Then ask, what does this remind me of? What feeling is it connected to? You'll start to notice patterns, and those patterns, they're your unconscious trying to have a conversation. Alan Watts once said, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself." And your shadow, it's the part of the universe you haven't fully explored yet. It speaks in riddles, dreams, and myth, not to confuse you, but to pull you toward the truth you've been trained to ignore. Because when archetypes show up in waking life, it means you're not just watching the story, you're living it. And your shadow, it's not just a character, it's the part of you that holds the next plot twist. Psychological warfare, when institutions weaponize your unmet needs. Have you ever bought something just to feel seen, or joined a movement only to realize later it wasn't about values, it was about belonging? These aren't coincidences, they're engineered responses. Because in a world run by psychological triggers, the shadow isn't just a personal issue, it's a public tool, and someone's always ready to pull its strings. In his chilling book Propaganda, Jacques Ellul explained that modern propaganda doesn't work by lying, it works by subtly reshaping your emotional landscape. Especially the parts you haven't healed. It finds your unmet needs, your buried fears, your hidden shame, and it builds stories around them. Stories that sell products, win elections, or manufacture enemies. Stories that feel personal, but are anything but. Take Robert Cialdini's principles of persuasion. His research shows that people are more likely to comply when they perceive scarcity, consistency, or social proof. Now connect that to shadow work. If you've internalized scarcity, maybe from a childhood where love or safety was unpredictable, you're far more vulnerable to urgency-based marketing. Only 3 left triggers an old fear, not logic. Or think about political rhetoric. Dan Ariely's free but costly experiments showed how people are more emotionally reactive when something appears free but comes with hidden strings. The same happens when campaigns tap into identity-based fear. If your shadow contains unhealed shame about not belonging, you're more likely to cling to in-group messages, even when they contradict your values. This is psychological warfare, not with guns, but with symbols, not through violence, but through emotional resonance. And it works best on those who've never made peace with their own shadow. The unexamined self is easy to program. The unresolved psyche is easy to sell to. So how do you protect yourself without shutting down? Use what I call the triple filter rule. Before you share, endorse, or emotionally react to a piece of content, ask 3 things. What emotion is this pulling in me? Fear, desire, or identity? Who benefits if I believe this? And is this story feeding a wound or healing one? Carl Jung warned that modern society, without real soul work, would become a machine of unconscious projection. Alan Watts echoed it, saying that when people lose contact with themselves, they become prey to forces outside them. That's not spiritual metaphor, it's psychological reality. Because when your shadow is unknown, it becomes a tool in someone else's hands. But when it's known, named, understood, integrated, it becomes armor, not the kind that hardens you, the kind that keeps you free. Mindfulness and neural plasticity, rewiring the shadow circuit. What if I told you that the way you relate to your shadow isn't fixed? That every harsh thought, impulsive reaction, or shameful emotion isn't a life sentence, but a brain loop you can rewire? The science says you're not stuck with the shadow. You're just used to fighting it. And mindfulness offers another option, one that transforms resistance into relationship. In Altered Traits, Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson examined the long-term effects of mindfulness meditation on the brain. They found something remarkable. With consistent practice, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, shrinks. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex thickens. The part of you that reacts gets quieter. The part that reflects gets stronger. What does that mean for shadow work? It means you can learn to stay present with the parts of yourself you used to run from. In one study, participants who completed just 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, showed a 48% drop in rumination. That inner loop of shame, guilt, blame, it slows down. William James, the father of American psychology, called attention the chief means of will. Where you place your focus, your identity follows. So if you learn to turn toward your shadow, not with fear, but with curiosity, it starts to change. Not because it disappears, but because it's finally being seen. Let's be clear, mindfulness isn't zoning out. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about staying with what's real, without judgment. When you sit with anger and just notice it, when you observe jealousy without becoming it, you create space. And in that space, the old neural pathways begin to weaken. New ones start to grow. That's neuroplasticity in action. You can start with a simple tool called RAIN. Recognize what you're feeling. Allow it to be there. Investigate where it's coming from, not intellectually, but gently, through your body, and nurture it with compassion. Even just 10 minutes a day of this practice begins to shift your relationship with the parts of you that once felt unbearable. Think of it like this. The shadow isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to be heard. And every time you sit with it, without pushing it away, you're building trust with yourself. Alan Watts often reminded us that we are not separate from the universe. We are expressions of it. That includes our darkness. So if you've been stuck in the same loop of self-judgment, know this. Your brain is built to change. And your shadow, it's not a curse, it's the map. Mindfulness just gives you the flashlight to read it. Creative alchemy, turning inner darkness into genius work. Let's face it, some of your greatest ideas, most intense emotions, and rawest truths didn't come from light. They came from chaos, from crisis, from a version of you that felt like it was falling apart. And yet, somehow, those moments birthed something real. That's not coincidence. That's alchemy. It's the hidden purpose of the shadow. Transformation through creation. Otto Rank, a student of Freud who later broke away, wrote a powerful book called Creativity and the Unconscious. He argued that true creativity doesn't come from peace. It comes from struggle, from the collision between our fears and our potential. He believed that artistic expression was a controlled descent into the unconscious, a negotiation with the shadow. When we stop resisting what's ugly, we begin to shape it. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi studied what he called the flow state, a mental space where your mind becomes absorbed, time vanishes, and self-consciousness fades. Many of the people he studied, painters, poets, surgeons, entered flow after wrestling with something difficult. They didn't escape their shadow. They used it as a launch pad. Even the brain reflects this. fMRI scans show that insight, the classic aha moment, often lights up the anterior superior temporal gyrus. And guess what? Those insights are more likely to come when your unconscious mind has been activated, through metaphor, emotion, even dreams. Which means your shadow doesn't just speak in pain, it speaks in breakthrough. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and founder of logotherapy, said it best. What is to give light must endure burning. He didn't say that to be poetic, he meant it literally. The pain you've been running from, it holds the fuel for your transformation, but only if you choose to work with it. Here's a creative ritual you can try right now. Take one of your worst-case thoughts, the kind that feels too dark to say out loud, and write it down. Then flip it. Turn it into a product idea, a piece of art, a comedy sketch, a poem, anything. You're not minimizing the pain. You're reassigning its energy. That's shadow alchemy. You take what was meant to haunt you and turn it into something that heals. Alan Watts often spoke of the dance between opposites. How beauty needs ugliness, joy needs sorrow, life needs death. Creativity is that dance. And your shadow, it's not trying to end the music. It's trying to change your rhythm. So the next time darkness visits, don't just survive it, shape it, mold it, turn it into a mirror, a metaphor, a message. Because when you use your pain with purpose, it stops being just yours and starts becoming something the world didn't know it needed. The 3-minute nightly shadow integration drill. Now that you've seen how the shadow influences your choices, emotions, relationships, even your creative potential, you might be wondering, what do I actually do with all this? How do I stop the cycle of judgment, resistance, and sabotage? The answer isn't to overhaul your entire life. It starts with something small, something honest. Just 3 minutes a night. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Alan Watts would agree. You don't fight the devil inside. You invite him in, pour him some tea, and ask what he's here to teach you. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about befriending the parts of you that have been rejected for too long. Here's how it works. Minute 1 is for reflection. At the end of your day, write down one thought, impulse, or reaction you had that felt unacceptable. Something you didn't post. Something you wish you hadn't said. Maybe it was envy. Maybe it was apathy. Maybe it was imagining revenge on someone who hurt you. Don't censor it. The more raw, the more real. That's your shadow speaking. Minute 2 is for reframing. Ask yourself, what unmet need was behind that thought? Was it safety? Was it to be seen? Was it about feeling powerful when you usually feel small? The goal isn't to justify the action. The goal is to understand the motive. Because underneath every ugly reaction is often a scared or starved part of you just trying to protect your place in the world. Minute 3 is for reassignment. Now that you've named the need, pick one healthy, intentional action you can take tomorrow to meet it. If your shadow showed up as anger, maybe you plan a tough but honest conversation. If it showed up as jealousy, maybe you channel that into setting your own new goals. The key is to redirect, not repress, the energy. Every shadow trait is just power with bad instructions. Give it new ones. Do this consistently, and your nervous system starts to trust you. Your mind no longer sees the shadow as a threat. Your brain begins to rewire. Old loops weaken. New patterns emerge. You stop being reactive and start being responsive. And slowly, you become the one thing Jung and Watts believed every human has the potential to be: integrated. Not perfect, not pure, but real, whole, capable of facing the full range of your humanity without shame. So tonight, when the noise fades and it's just you and your thoughts, try it. 3 minutes. One truth. One need. One action. Because the shadow isn't waiting to attack you. It's waiting to join you. And when it does, you don't become less human, you become more. Drop a comment below and share one insight your shadow has whispered to you lately. And if this helped, send it to a friend who's also ready to stop hiding from their mirror. Because real strength isn't found in denial. It's born the moment we stop running from the dark and learn to walk with it.